is working with producers across the state of Oklahoma to help alfalfa production identify their needs, put together tools that they can use for extension. And one of the ways we want to go about doing that is seeing what they're lacking in information and how we can meet those needs. So through that target goal, we came up with the Alfalfa Best Practices Survey, and it is a 2-year study, and this is the 2nd year. And in order to really help producers, we need a lot of them to tell us, what their production goals are, what they have gotten in quality or production in the last several years. And it's about a 10 to 15 minute survey, so it's not too long. And, we just want to know, what are they struggling in alfalfa production, and where are they really hitting the marks to provide high yielding and high quality alfalfa across the state. So this originally started out by me going to producer meetings and meeting producers and getting some of their information. But COVID happened and I can't do that anymore. So I've had to adapt a little bit. And I've really enjoyed putting the survey together because not only can it be done online, I can also email you a copy of the survey and you can do it on paper and email it back to me. But I also know that some producers really just love talking about what they do. So I'm also open to having a phone conversation and getting some of that data from producers. Again, this survey is anonymous, so no one will have your name corresponding to the information that you give us about your production. And we will give you all of the results from the survey back. So we're really doing this survey to help provide the producer with production strategies or the tools that they need to be better. And so you'll get all of that data back. And then not only that, but anyone who completes the survey will also be getting an Oklahoma alfalfa hat, which is pretty great, if I say so myself. Everyone in our department really likes them. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to contact me at my email. It is in the chat box as well as on the screen, elena.gerhart@okstate.edu. If you have any questions, feel free to call the number listed in the chat box as well. Ask me questions. If you have any questions at all, I'm more than happy to accommodate you with multiple ways of getting that survey done. And then again, it is an online survey as well, so you can find that link in the chat box, and it's also online on the Plant Science website. So I'm really looking forward to getting some of the production information across the state of Oklahoma, and also getting to, get some contact from producers. So let me know if you have any questions.
All right, thanks, Elena. We appreciate that. We did put that information, your contact information, again, is in the chat. The survey is listed online, and we hope to have that on the beef.okstate.edu website in short order as well. So if really with any of our programming, if you have questions, that's kind of the one-stop shop to get a hold of any of us and the various opportunities for beef cattle production in the beef industry here at OSU. So with that, I'll introduce myself and then turn it over to Dr. Lohman and Dr. Beck for brief comments, and then we'll get rolling, Dr. Bassett. So I'm Rosalind Biggs. I'm a beef cattle extension specialist with Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service, as well as the College of Veterinary Medicine. We're super excited to have you today. Do encourage you to take an opportunity at that, to take that link, especially on my old stomping ground in Southwest Oklahoma around Chickasha. Of course, Grady County's got a lot of alfalfa, so good opportunity there. Dr. Lohman, I'll turn it over to you. Looks like we've lost Dr. Beck once again. We're having some tech problems for Dr. Beck, but Dr. Paul Beck, of course, is one of our extension, beef cattle extension team members as well. And so, Dr. Lohman, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Biggs. Welcome, Dr. Bassett. So we've been doing these Ranchers Lunchtime series since last April, actually, and they've been very successful. We're glad you could join us here again today. I might just mention that we we're trying to get our survey at the end. We mention it every week, but at the end of the, when you leave today, hopefully you'll have a real brief, I think it's like a 6-question survey that you'd have the opportunity to fill out. We hope that works for us here today. And just remember that responses to that are, what's the word I'm looking
They're
for?
anonymous. They're
Thank
anonymous.
you.
We're not going
Anonymous.
to, you are. So if
Yep.
you like us, great. If you don't like us, we like that feedback too.
Right.
We want to hear what your needs are.
But we think it's important that you know that it's anonymous. So.
All right. Well, with that, Dr. Lohman, I just want to again welcome everybody. We do have Dr. Clint Rusk, our animal science department head, is on with us today. So welcome, Dr. Rusk, and thanks for being with us, especially on a busy day here at OSU. And Dr. Bassett, we'll get started with you if you want to go ahead and pull up your presentation. I'll give everybody just a short introduction, let you know a little bit about Dr. Bassett. He's originally from Lincoln, Nebraska, and we won't hold that against you, Dr. Bassett. At least you made it to the right place at some point. Dr. Bassett grew up, of course, around livestock and agriculture, and as many of us, that leads us to our career paths. He earned his bachelor's degree from Hastings College in 2012, and then later his DVM from Iowa State University in 2016. He then earned a master's from the University of Nebraska in 2019. Make sure I get all these points right, Dr. Bassett. I want to give you full credit there. After graduation from veterinary school, he was in equine racetrack practice for a bit, and then worked on his master's degree at the Great Plains Veterinary Education Center that many of us are familiar with, of course, at Clay Center, Nebraska, where he had the chance to teach veterinary students as well as promote veterinary care to both horses and cattle. We're very fortunate to have him here at Oklahoma State University and College of Veterinary Medicine as one of our residents in theriogenology or reproduction. And Dr. Bassett's helped me out with a few opportunities last spring, and we were pretty successful in that. So I'm a fan of his. I should also mention too, that in addition to his residency that he's pursuing, he is also currently working on his PhD as well in reproductive tract microbiome of both mares and cows as well. So with that, Dr. Bassett, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Biggs. You're spot on all those points.
All right.
So yeah, great. Thank you. So yes, as Dr. Biggs mentioned, I'll be talking about managing first calf heifers through their second calving season today. So I'll just dive right in. So here's a little bit of an outline of the talk. I've got it kind of broke up into sort of two separate parts, if you will. The first part here is I'll mention puberty, and then the second part I'll talk more specifically about management strategies that you can employ for your heifers. So on with the puberty. Now, of course, this talk is focused on the second calf heifers, but a lot of things that matter for your second calf heifers sort of begin before they've even had their first calf. And in some ways, it even begins before they're even born. So that's why I thought it was important to mention puberty here, because this plays a major role in heifers' future success in a breeding herd. And so one thing to keep in mind here is the age at puberty. So here are the two main species of beef cattle that we have. We have the Bos taurus, of course, and then Bos indicus. And then the Bos taurus, they tend to reach puberty a little bit earlier than Bos indicus. About 12 to 14 months of age is when they reach puberty. So those are, of course, the continental breeds and British breeds. And then the Bos indicus breeds tend to reach puberty a little bit later on, about 15 to 18 months of age. And I've even seen it written that Bos indicus can even reach puberty at about 24 months of age. So they can be significantly longer than some of the other breeds of beef cattle that you may deal with. And so that's one thing to think about, because that determines when a heifer is ready to breed in the first place, and that may help you to determine anyway when she, whether or not you want to keep one in your herd. But there's a few different definitions for the onset of puberty. And the three most common I have laid out right here. The first would be just the age at first estrus. So when she reaches her first cycle is when she's reached puberty. The second would be her age at first ovulation. So just when she ovulates for the first time, that means she's reached puberty. And probably what seems to me anyway to be the most common definition for the onset of puberty would be this third one here, the age for pregnancy support. And what I mean by that is at what age does a particular heifer reach where she becomes able to support a pregnancy from the time she conceives all the way until the time she calves without having any problems. And so those are sort of three definitions for the onset of puberty, but those are things to think about when you're looking at calves that you're thinking could potentially be part of your replacement herd. Think about when they might be starting puberty, and that may help in some timing. As far as puberty goes, a common rule of thumb for when beef heifers begin puberty is when they've reached about 60 to 65% of their mature body weight. And so you want them to reach about this point before the first breeding season. Then they'll be more likely to be able to conceive successfully and to successfully support the pregnancy all the way through to calving. Kind of as a side note that I added here is you should shoot for them to be about 85% of their mature body weight during gestation. That'll set you up for more success at the time of calving as well. But as far as puberty goes, beef heifers tend to start puberty when they've reached the 60 to 65% of their mature body weight. So now, as far as some hormones that I wanted to mention, of course, there's, puberty, there's all kinds of hormones that occur during puberty, but two of the most important that I can think of right now that pertain to this topic would be GnRH and LH. GnRH is known as gonadotropin releasing hormone, and that's released from the hypothalamus. When hypothalamus, of course, is a structure in the brain, and this really controls, if you will, your the reproductive cycle in some ways, in the sense that GnRH gets released from the hypothalamus, moves to the pituitary, and then causes release of LH, the luteinizing hormone. And then that luteinizing hormone is what makes its way to the ovary and causes ovulation. And so that's really important when it comes to breeding, obviously, because they have to have a successful ovulation in order to conceive and then carry a pregnancy through to term. So those are some important hormones. But as far as the hypothalamus goes, you have to have a fully developed hypothalamus and a fully developed pituitary gland in order for these hormones to even be able to do their job. And so the hypothalamus, it's not a thing that just suddenly it's fully developed right when she starts puberty. It's not a sudden event. It grows over time. And so that's important to think about when it comes to breeding heifers. You need the hypothalamus to be fully developed and have full neural activity, because that will allow the hypothalamus to release the GnRH in the surges that you have to have. And I'll show a diagram here in a minute, but there's sort of two parts to the hypothalamus. You have the tonic center and the surge center. And that tonic center releases GnRH in sort of a constant fashion, if you will. It's a kind of a low level release of GnRH that does not lead to ovulation. That surge center is what you need in order to have ovulation. And that surge center will cause a surge of GnRH to be released, which then moves to the pituitary gland and causes a surge of LH to be released. When you have those surges, that's when you can have a successful ovulation. But you can only get these surges if you have a fully developed hypothalamus and a fully developed pituitary in animals that have successfully undergone puberty. So puberty is really important to think about, because it does sort of determine some of the timing you have when it comes to selecting heifers to be used both for their first breeding season and then that could go on into their second calving season. And so here's the diagram I was talking about, and this comes out of a out of a book by Dr. Sanger, and I've cited that later on. But here we have our hypothalamus, and we have our surge center and our tonic center here, and then here we have our pituitary gland, and the GnRH gets released from one of these two centers, but in talking about ovulation, the GnRH will get released from the surge center, move on into the pituitary gland, cause the release of LH, which then will go on and act on the follicle to cause an ovulation. That GnRH also releases FSH, that's follicle stimulating hormone, and that's what helps the follicles to grow. The follicles have to develop and mature before they can ovulate. But in terms of getting pregnant, what you really need are that GnRH and that LH to cause the ovulation. So now, I mentioned here a couple slides ago about body weight and how that affects the onset of puberty, and that's important too. But there are a few other causes that may hasten, if you will, the onset of puberty. One in particular is the male effect, and this is really well documented in pigs, where if you have a boar in the presence of some gilts, it'll cause them to go into puberty, start the process of puberty. And so it's possible that that could occur with cattle as well. You know, if some heifers are near a bull enough that they see the bull enough, they might be able to go into puberty. There are some other social cues that may cause them to go into puberty. I don't know any specific ones off the top of my head other than that male effect, but there could be some other social cues as well. And then the season of birth may also affect their onset of puberty. But probably two of the most important that you might read about would be that body weight one, where they need to be 60 to 65% of their mature body weight, and then the male effect as well. And so now with some more specific management strategies for these heifers. As far as for selection of heifers, if you want to retain heifers, it's a good idea to retain more than you think you might need that will actually stay in your herd. This will kind of give you some room to choose, if you will, as far as, you know, if you have some that maybe don't turn out to be as successful as you thought they might be, you've got a little wiggle room this way. One of the more common practices would be to retain your oldest heifers and or your heaviest heifers. The oldest ones, of course, they were born earliest, and so they had more time to grow and mature. And then the heaviest heifers, you know, that's great that they're nice and heavy, but it suggests that they had really great mothers. You know, their mothers lactated well and raised them well, and so that suggests that these heifers will go on to be good mothers as well. And that's important with replacement heifers. You want heifers that are going to be good mothers so they can raise future calves and have good longevity in your herd in that regard. Some other things to consider would be the environment of your ranch. You need animals that suit your environment. And just because maybe they were raised on your ranch might not necessarily mean that they're really the perfect animal for your ranch. And so it'd be a good idea to kind of think about what ones are healthiest and most robust for the environment that you have at your place. Reproductive tract scoring, that's been talked about extensively a few lectures ago, so I won't go into detail about that, but that's one method you could use to help you in choosing what heifers you'd like to retain and which ones you prefer not to retain. And of course, I mentioned the mothering ability. If their dam was a good mother, there's a good chance that that particular heifer will also be a good mother. So it's a good idea to take those kinds of things into consideration as well. But, you know, when it comes to selecting heifers to retain for your herd, it's not all about their reproductive or mothering ability either. You could think about things like their conformation. You don't want to retain a heifer that might be lame all the time, or has other issues as far as their conformation goes, and just overall health. It's a good idea to retain ones that stay healthy and maybe responded well to whatever health management practices that you do on your operation. It's a good idea to have the ones that are the healthiest around. Now, as for nutrition, I'm not a nutritionist myself, but I would say when it comes to heifers, this is probably one of the most, if not the most important aspects to be thinking about when it comes to managing them. It's so important that they have the right nutrition that they need in order to be successful in your herd. The key thing about heifers is they're still growing. They're still developing and becoming adults themselves. And so that presents some specific challenges with heifers when managing the heifers compared to the mature cows. And so it's a good idea, if possible, to separate your heifers from your mature cows, and not just your first calf heifers, but separate the second calf heifers as well from the mature cows, because those second calf heifers are still developing themselves. And so they need to take in their nutrients. Everything they take in goes not only to raising the fetus that they may have within them, but also to developing their own bodies and their own selves. And they need that in order to be successful, of course. The mature cows are already mature and they can kind of focus their nutrition on their calves that they're developing, but not the heifers. And so that's really important. The thing about nutrition too, is it's one of these things that really, it starts well before you even think about retaining them as heifers. This starts when they're calves. So it's important that while they're calves, it's important that their mothers provide enough milk for them to raise them. Another reason why picking the heaviest heifers to retain would be a good idea, because that suggests that they had enough milk to be raised on as calves. And as far as their own mothers too, the nutrition of their own mothers when they were calves, making sure that they had adequate protein supplementation and adequate water and adequate hay. This all starts early. The hay thing, especially in the wintertime, that's assuming we're talking about a spring calving season, let's say, that would be late gestation. And that's when the fetus develops in size the most. A lot of their organs are already developed by that time, but size starts to come. And so it's important to make sure they have protein, of course, for that development, but the hay will help keep the mothers warm, for example, with the fermentation processes going on with the hay. And that's all important, not only for these heifers' mothers while these heifers are calves, but also when these heifers are pregnant themselves and trying to develop a fetus so they can have a calf in the future. And then, of course, you hear a lot about body condition score, and that's so important here as well. You should shoot for having a body condition score of 5 to 6 out of 9 at breeding and at calving. If you go too far one way or the other, if you let them get too skinny or too fat, you could have problems breeding them, but you'll also predispose to having calving problems as well, one way or the other. So kind of the sweet spot for body condition score would be a 5 to 6 out of 9. And you can achieve that when you have the proper nutrition management in these animals leading up to the breeding time and also on through gestation leading up to calving. Another management tool you may want to employ is genetic testing. This can help you as well to decide which heifers to retain in your herd, both for their first calving seasons and then on into their second calving seasons. And you can test for things like marbling traits or genetic diseases, anything that you may want to either have a part of your herd or even to try to keep out of your herd. This would be a good tool to use if you choose. Now, when it comes to breeding the heifers, again, I already mentioned before, but it's a good idea to keep them separated from the cow herd. This allows them to, I'd say the main reason to keep them separated from the cow herd when it comes to breeding is so that way you can set up their calving seasons a little differently. It's commonly suggested to breed your heifers a month in advance of the mature cows. This will allow the heifers to calve earlier, but then also give them more time to heal from the calving, if you will. And I'll get into that topic in a little bit, but it'll allow them to be prepared to be bred back and be successful in your herd that way. Now, I do know in some of the more northern states, people may separate it such that the heifers are bred after the cows and then calve after the cows. That's a possible strategy as well. But keeping them separated is important as long as you're able to manage the heifers when they calve separately, but also able to allow them enough time to be prepared to be bred back. And so those would be important concepts to keep in mind there. Now, during gestation for management of these heifers, again, I mentioned that the making sure they have adequate hay. This, again, helps them when it comes to developing their fetus in the later months, but also helps them to stay warm in the later months. And it gets pretty cold here in Oklahoma. I'm from Nebraska and it gets way cold there, but I've been pretty cold here in Oklahoma too. And so it's important to make sure your heifers can stay warm that way. And the thing about it too, heifers, whether you're talking about first calf heifers or second calf heifers, they're still developing themselves. And so all of these nutrients have to go to all kinds of different processes in these heifers. And one of them is to try to stay warm. And so just making sure they have some hay to munch on all the time when there's not a lot of good grass around is so important for them. Protein supplementation as well. Again, the heifers are still growing themselves, but when they're pregnant, they're also trying to grow a fetus. And so they need all the supplementation they can get in order to be able to allow this fetus to grow, but also allow themselves to grow as well. So, major things to think about there. And this is another reason it's a good idea to manage them separately from the cows, because, you're going to need to keep a closer eye on these replacement heifers to make sure they're getting the nutrients that they need. Cows can kind of take care of themselves in some ways because they're older and more mature. But the heifers, they may need a little bit more management in that regard. So the postpartum period, this is what I mentioned before about making sure the heifers have enough time to heal after they've calved, if you will. So the postpartum period is just the time between calving and their first estrus cycle. So between calving and when they first go into heat. And it does take longer in heifers than in mature cows. So this is another reason it's a good idea to manage the heifers separately from the cows, even when they're second calf heifers, because they're just younger. It takes a little longer for this postpartum period to occur. And the major thing that occurs during the postpartum period is uterine involution. And you need that to happen complete in order to be able to successfully breed back. And it takes roughly 30 days in heifers and about 20 days in mature cows. And so that uterine involution, of course, that's just the uterus shrinking back from its gravid pregnant size, shrinking back to a normal non-gravid, non-pregnant size. And so if any of you have had cattle that have undergone a C-section, you've actually witnessed this most likely. If you've watched your veterinarian do the C-section, once they pull the calf out, they start to sew up the uterus, and you notice that uterus is shrinking as they do it. That's the uterine involution that's going on. So it starts basically immediately when the calf comes out. And then it continues over the course of this postpartum period. So that way the heifer or the cow, if you're talking about cows, that way they're ready to be bred back. And again, nutritional management is important here. You want to make sure they're in the proper body condition score. Another key thing to think about with animals during this postpartum period is, of course, they've had their calf now. So now they're lactating, and now they have to try to feed the calf that way and produce enough milk. And when they're in that stage, when they're in lactation, so much of their nutrition, so much of the energy that they take in goes toward producing that milk. You need to make sure that they're getting the proper nutritional management and make sure that they're maintaining their body condition score. So that way they themselves, especially these heifers that are still growing, can still grow and can still maintain their body condition, so that way they can stay healthy, because lactation is pretty hard on these animals. And then again, they have to be ready to breed back again in roughly 30 days or 2 months, depending on when you want to start breeding again. But at least that amount of time is needed in order for uterine involution to occur. And so it's important to make sure you maintain the body condition score as they go. Now, another concept here is dystocia. So calving difficulties. This will have a major impact on the postpartum period. It'll actually lengthen the postpartum period if you have a dystocia. And so here's another reason why it's so important to manage the heifers, first or second calf heifers, separately from the cow herd, is so that way you can check them more frequently. And heifers are more common to have dystocias than cows. And so you want to be able to keep a closer eye on your heifers. And then you want to provide assistance as fast as you can, so that way you can reduce the postpartum period as much as you can. You reduce the impact on the postpartum period as much as you can. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that the minute you start seeing a heifer calve and you start seeing little feet come out, you just slap on the chains and pull her out. You don't need to do that. It's okay to let them, if they'll calve normally, go ahead and let them do that. But if you're noticing that a heifer has been trying to calve for an extended period of time, let's say an hour has gone by, and maybe you see little feet, but nothing has progressed for that whole hour, then it's a good idea to jump in there and start assisting, because with every 30 minutes delay in assistance, when assistance is needed, you tack on extra time to that postpartum period. And extra time tacked onto that postpartum period means a delay in the heifer's ability to be retained within the herd. And so that's important. Now, as far as pregnancy diagnosis, once you've bred these heifers and you're preg checking, this is a time that can help you determine which heifers you may want to retain, as second calf heifers. So, of course, you can do this by palpating by hand with your veterinarian as well, or ultrasounding. And the benefit to the ultrasound, when you're palpating by hand, you can kind of judge the size of the fetus by what you feel and things like that. And that can help you determine the age of the fetus and determine roughly when that heifer conceived. But the advantage to the ultrasound is that can help enhance your determination of when she conceived. You can actually do some fetal aging in that regard, because when different organs develop. For example, fetuses will develop a heartbeat at about 21 days of age. So if you want to do your preg checking at about 21 days, let's say, and you see some fetuses with a heartbeat and some without a heartbeat, well, then you know that those ones with a heartbeat are a little older, they were conceived earlier, and this may be information that you kind of keep in the back of your mind to say, okay, maybe I want to select these heifers with these older fetuses to be the ones that I retain in my herd. So something to think about there. And then with the calving of heifers, I kind of already mentioned this a little bit. It's a good idea to calve them separately. Even as second calf heifers, they're still more predisposed to having calving difficulties than say the mature cows might be. And so, you can catch that sooner, and they still need more time for complete uterine involution to occur. And again, you need that uterine involution to occur in order for them to be set up properly to breed back and be successful in your herd. And then again, like I mentioned, intervene as soon as possible. If you notice that there are troubles with calving, try not to delay the assistance that you provide, because delayed assistance will just increase that postpartum period. And again, body condition score is so important here as well. You want to have heifers and mature cows too that are about a body condition score of 5 to 6 out of 9. This will this will help improve the chances of having a successful calving with minimal or no assistance, and that's really important. So, in conclusion, heifers, second calf heifers present some unique challenges. But thinking about some of these various management strategies will help to improve longevity within your herd, and having that longevity for these heifers that you retain is so important in that regard. And so with that, I think I'll take any questions. Here are the here are the sources that I used. Anyway, there we go.
All right, Dr. Bassett. Great presentation. We appreciate you being here with us. We do have a handful of questions. Talk to us a little bit about, and I think we have a great summary of a number of things that have been brought up throughout the series. I like the comprehensive approach of the discussion today. But talk to us a little bit about your feelings for practicing AI in heifers at that very first estrus. What are accurate, acceptable expectations, or should we be looking for longer? Should we be looking a little bit longer past that very first estrus?
Well, I think I think certainly AI at the first. I think you could certainly try for that. It might be better to wait a little later, but that's something you could certainly try for anyway. I guess I don't have much more of an answer than that, so I apologize there. But
it's all right, no problem. You mentioned at the beginning of the discussion a little bit about factors that could impact that heifer's longevity even before maybe she was born. Can you highlight a few of those things for us, maybe that we need to be considering? Lots of discussion, of course, about fetal programming, etc. What are things? Obviously, we want to get those heifers into that second pregnancy, but maybe we need to think about those calves too if we're looking at raise and replacements. So, what are some items there we maybe need to consider?
Yeah, I think probably the most important, for that would be the nutrition of the dam, making sure that while these heifers are fetuses in the womb, making sure the dam has proper nutrition so that way she can grow the fetus well. But then also after the heifers are born, making sure the dam has all the nutrition she needs and adequate water so that way she can lactate appropriately. Those would be probably the most important things in my mind that would help these heifers to grow and be successful as adults.
We've got another question in the chat. As a round number, practical number of the heifers we would have each year in a herd, do you have general recommendations for us as far as how many we should be considering keeping back? We talked about keeping maybe those oldest heifers, of course, those in maybe excellent body condition. and the factors there, but what are your general recommendations on what the practical number for a producer might look like?
Sure. So this is going to kind of depend on the size of herd that you already have, but somewhere about I'd have to look up the statistics specifically, but somewhere around like 10 to 20% might be appropriate. But again, it kind of depends on, as far as specific numbers go, it would kind of depend on the size of herd that you have.
Sure, and the needs, of course, moving forward with what the market and feed. We're getting ready to talk about our next series about managing cattle in drought type conditions. So all of those environmental factors have a play on that number too. So can you explain or reiterate how late calving reduces the postpartum interval?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, in my mind anyway, this would kind of depend on when you plan to breed as well. So if you have a heifer that calves later than the others, but she could potentially have a shorter amount of time to go through that postpartum period, depending on when you want to start breeding, start your breeding season. And so that would be how these heifers would not potentially have enough time to get through that full uterine involution. And that to me is the key factor in that postpartum period. They need enough time to fully get that uterine involution completed. And so heifers that calve late may not have enough time to do that.
What about heifers and dystocias? How does a dystocia impact that female's ability for uterine involution and return to estrus? And what
Sure.
considerations would we have there of those that have dystocias? And maybe hit on specifically if we're having to C-section a heifer, what do we need to be thinking about her keeping her in the herd or not?
Sure. And so in some ways, this will sort of depend on the severity of the dystocia. If you're, as I said, if you intervene quickly and you're able to just do a nice easy pull, you just put the chains on and pull the calf out and you started that as soon as you noticed it, potentially the postpartum period might not be impacted as much. But if you have a heifer that you had to do a C-section on, that could potentially increase the postpartum period, particularly if it took a long time to notice that maybe she needed the C-section, or maybe the C-section took a long time. Maybe there's some complications there. You need to, that will increase the postpartum period in that regard. I'm sorry, Dr. Biggs, what was the rest of that question? Was there more?
No, I think you got it. I think covered all bases on that. Talk to us a little bit about pregnancy diagnosis and in particular using the ultrasound. Brian has a question for us. And what's your target date, length of gestation we should be looking at to ultrasound those females on? Are we talking a 28 days, 60 days, 90 days? Is there an advantage to one date or another?
Well, I don't know if I would say, as far as, I don't know if I would say there's necessarily an advantage to one of those dates over the others. The earlier dates would help in the sense that it would give you an idea, how, whether or not they conceived during that particular breeding cycle. If you wait later, there might be more organs to focus on with the ultrasounds. That might help you out in that regard. So either way, I suppose by doing your preg check earlier, you can determine which heifers didn't get pregnant or which ones didn't get pregnant early enough for you, and you could potentially get them out of the herd sooner. So that would be the advantage if you wanted to do that. But it would kind of just depend on what works for you, really, I think, because any of those times would be okay. in that regard.
All right.
Dr. Bassett, I've got a question. So, we've talked a lot about synchronization in the series here. Relative to these first calf heifers, you're trying to, if you're interested in a synchronization in an AI program, and I know my question may be complicated with how much earlier you choose to calve those as first calf heifers ahead of the cow herd. But I guess basically my question is, would you anticipate a lower synchronization response and then maybe even a lower pregnancy rate in those 2-year-olds that you're trying to breed back for their second calf compared to the mature cows? Or would you think that, your success rate would be similar and you're actually maybe stimulating a few more of those 2-year-olds to come into heat that first time when they wouldn't have otherwise?
Sure. Well, I think, I think still being young and being heifers, I would be concerned that you might have a lower pregnancy rate in them. However, assuming that, especially with the nutrition, assuming that they've had good nutrition throughout their first gestation and throughout their first calving, you could, given that these second calf heifers are a little bit older than the first calf heifers, you could potentially be looking at, a similar success rate as you might have in the mature cows. I mean, they're still maturing and getting a little bit older as they go. So potentially you could expect a lower rate in them, but depending on different factors that have occurred throughout their gestation and management factors that occurred during that time, it could really go either way.
They accumulate, don't they?
Yeah.
Those factors.
Dr. Lallman always likes answers that say better nutrition, right? Dr. Lallman?
That's always the correct one anyway.
That's right.
I figured he'd like that.
Well, I think it's spot on. I mean, nutrition is the key to much of our success, and we're able to, once we get that taken care of, then we can fine tune a lot of these other more flexible points. So if we don't have I'm not seeing any other questions, Dr. Lallman, make sure I don't miss any in that Q&A or chat as we go along. So Dr. Bassett, we sure want to thank you for being with us. We're happy you've made your way to Oklahoma State, and happy to be part of your journey, and thanks for sharing your knowledge with us today. As a reminder for our attendees, we will start a new section to our Rangers Thursday Lunchtime series next week. You will have to go ahead and register for this. So this is a separate registration again. And I'll go ahead and put that registration in the chat. We'll be visiting, this is a series headed up by Wes Lee, of course, our agricultural coordinator for the Oklahoma Mesonet. And we'll have speakers next week visiting with us about weather patterns and where we are financial assistance wise with USDA and US Drought Monitor, and how those elements can be utilized to impact your bottom line and the success of your operation. As always, these sessions are recorded and are available at beef.okstate.edu. So if perhaps you're looking for that bit of information, maybe that you missed, or a topic that you missed, we encourage you to take a look there, along with our other valuable tools and resources to producers in Oklahoma and beyond. I think we've had a great series, great attendance. I think Dr. Prather was back on with us today. We want to thank Dr. Prather, Dr. Bassett, Dr. Thomas, etc., all our presenters of this series. I think it's been well received and a good one, and certainly important. So with that, just as a reminder, visit beef.okstate.edu to register for our next session, and take a look at that chat. Make sure you've got that there. Our partners with alfalfa production are needing some input on their survey. And we're fortunate to have Elena with us today, working with Dr. Rocatelli to get some more information to advance our producers. So with that, Dr. Lallman, have I forgotten anything?
No, ma'am. Good job, Dr. Bassett. Might just mention, some of you are, Dr. Bassett mentioned Cow-Calf Nutrition. We have a nice handy little software tool there on that website, beef.okstate.edu. We had just recently made a slight update to that tool, and that new version is posted there. So if you haven't downloaded Calculator lately, you might go get the newest version. Hope to see y'all next week.
All right, definitely a great tool in the calculator. We do encourage you to please, we're ending just before 1:30, so take a moment if you don't mind and fill out our survey that should automatically launch. We're crossing our fingers on that. Make sure I got all the boxes checked to get that to launch for you. But take a moment if you would and fill out that survey for us. We're interested in your feedback, and specific to this presentation, as well as in series as a whole and looking forward. So with that, thanks again for spending your Thursday lunch with us, and we will see you next week.